Well, the headlines of today could be on the minds of voters when they head to the ballot box on November 3rd. Both campaigns know this, but so do members of the media, which is why some stories are getting covered and others are being sidelined. Here to help us cut through the noise to determine what matters and what doesn't is Boyd Matheson, an opinion editor for Deseret News and the former chief of staff to Senator Mike Lee. So, Boyd, the most watched event on Tuesday night was Tucker Carlson's interview with former business partner of Hunter Biden. And in fact, it's one of the most watched episodes of anything ever, what we're seeing today. So I want to play a clip from that and then get your response on the other side.
I'm thinking about the Biden family, like, how are they doing this? I know Joe decided not to run in 2016, but what if he ran in the future? Aren't they taking political risk or headline risk? And I remember looking at Jim Biden and saying, how are you guys getting away with this? Like, aren't you concerned? And he looked at me and he laughed a little bit and said, plausible deniability.
He said that out loud?
Yes, he said it directly to me, one-on-one in a cabana at the Peninsula Hotel after about a hour and a half, 2-hour meeting.
So, Boyd, 7.5 million people watched that, and I can't even think of another episode that would even compare to that. But we know that there is issues with censorship when it comes to this topic more broadly. But what do you think? Does this issue affect votes at all?
Well, I think the only way it will actually impact voters in the end is not getting into the weeds of it, because we're not going to get to the bottom of all of this before Tuesday and all the votes are cast. I think the president and his campaign team, if they were wise, they'd actually dial it back just a half step, get out of the weeds of the nitty gritty of emails and accusations and denials, and go back to the message that won President Trump the presidency in 2016. And that is a populist message of, look, I'm here to fight for the little guy. And I'm tired of leftist elites, the wealthy and the well-connected, continuing to have an unlevel playing field and reaping all the benefits. And I think if they got to that message, that could actually sway some of those undecideds and some of those folks who maybe voted for the president in 2016, but are kind of on the sidelines right now, not sure if they'll actually cast a vote in 2020.
I think you're exactly right. I think that when you get into the weeds of, for example, where an extra 10% came in the matter of 6 months or so, that's kind of insider baseball. I think that's more for people who really like paying attention to this stuff. But I think if the campaign can just say, you know what? Joe Biden has been in office for 47 years. He's been profiting outside of it, and he's been using his influence for his own well-being. I think that is something that is easier to understand, and it gets the point across while allowing the administration to focus on the things you were talking about, things that matter to voters, especially undecided voters like the economy. But I understand why many networks were hesitant to cover this story. They've been scrutinized for the way that they covered WikiLeaks, for example, back in 2016. But now the claims do seem to be verified, and many network stars are saying that they still have anxiety about 2016 heading into 2020, acknowledging what happened to Hillary Clinton. So I want to play you what MSNBC's Chris Hayes said about it. Here it is.
And to be clear, there are a lot of legitimate reasons for people to be nervous a week before Election Day. Number one, I don't have to remind you of this. Everyone remembers 4 years ago. And even though the national polls were pretty close to accurate down the stretch, there were major polling issues in individual states, particularly Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, that meant that Donald Trump eked out that narrow victory in the Electoral College. Number two, if this election was decided the way that almost every other election in America is decided, by who gets the most votes, people would be less stressed out. After all, Joe Biden is leading nationally by almost 8 points in the NBC polling average, and more than 66 million votes are already in. But of course, it is not decided that way. Instead, we use the Electoral College system.
Now, Boyd, I do see a lot of similarities between 2016 and 2020. Joe Biden, for example, today is not out on the campaign trail. Senator Kamala Harris is going to states like Texas and Georgia. Doesn't this look a lot like 2016?
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities to it. Let's attack both of those issues there. First, the Electoral College. The rule still stands that if you're complaining about the rules or the referees, you're probably losing. Yeah. So I think that means there's probably some nervousness, and rightly so, because saying, hey, we can win the popular vote. But again, that's not the rule. The goalpost is the Electoral College, so you have to win there. As it relates to who's actually going to show up and vote and the polls being right or wrong, I think the most underreported thing going on right now is, I believe, in addition to the small percentage of undecideds, that's probably 5% or less right now, but there is a big group of people who have voted consistently in the past and probably voted for President Trump in 2016, many of them solely on the basis of the Supreme Court. Many of those voters have become exhausted and tired. They've disconnected from the process, so they're not showing up in polls right now because they are unlikely voters. So the interesting thing is, does the raising of Amy Coney Barrett to the Supreme Court, does that reawaken some of those voters? Are there also other voters out there who, again, are just kind of disengaged because they're exhausted by the rhetoric of the far left and the far right? Are those people going to wake up between now and Tuesday and suddenly decide, you know what, I am going to cast a vote, and here's where I'm going to go? And again, who speaks to those people over the next couple of days is going to be really critical. If you can motivate them with things that matter to them, as opposed to just the rhetorical stuff, that's going to get it really interesting coming down the stretch.
I mean, that's fascinating, actually. It's something I never thought about, but it does speak to something. The other day on CNN, there was a man who said that, for example, if he was pro-life, and he said, you know, if Amy Coney Barrett gets on the bench, I might vote for Joe Biden, because at that point I got what I needed. And I remember thinking there, I mean, it was just kind of a strange perspective, but it goes to show you that, I mean, different issues do matter different to different people. And especially when we're talking about polls too, if they don't necessarily capture voter enthusiasm. I think that's one thing that you need to think about, because you could ask 10 people, for example, if they're voting for Joe Biden, 6 may say yes, but getting those people to the polls is something a little bit different. So I think there's a lot to look at. But speaking of that, Republicans have been focusing on early voting, and they've even tried to discredit it to some degree. And we saw that following the last debate, that many people may be having second thoughts about the votes that they have already cast. Here's how this issue was reported on Fox News.
Apparently, according to Google Trends, one of the searches that is trending right now is the question, can I change my vote? Because, you know, also in a number of states, this is tied to searches for Hunter Biden. And I'm sure after the former vice president said this stuff about fracking, people might have second thoughts. But nonetheless, according to this article, it is possible to change your vote, even though you have early voted, via absentee ballot.
Yeah, now that varies by state. So before you go marching down to your local board of elections, make sure you're one of the states where you can do that.
I thought that was very interesting. I mean, I'm not exactly sure what would have spurred that Google trend of changing your vote. It could have been the debate. It could have been Hunter Biden, as they said. But do you think that it was the last debate that is prompting this type of Google search result, or do you think it was something else?
You know, I think a lot of the debate certainly had some impact there. The Hunter Biden pieces probably have some factor in there. The comments about fracking, I think, clearly probably had some issues in Pennsylvania and other places. So I do think there are some things that are kind of mounting, a little bit of momentum there coming down the home stretch that I think is going to be fascinating to watch. And again, interesting, when you start looking at the challenges of early voting and vote by mail, that is one of the core issues that many people say, wait a minute, what happens if there's an October surprise? What happens if something is revealed in a debate or an interview or something from their past? And so it is something that we really need to think through really well, state by state, as they pointed out, is really the issue. Some you can by doing that absentee, and others, once you cast that vote, even if you cast it in late September, early October, you're in.
No, I know. I'm sure that there's Republican circles sharing that very fact right there, saying, you know what, maybe we need to rethink early voting in our states because, for example, right now, this is something that looks like it would have benefited the Trump campaign more, but I guess we have to see those ballots first. But apart from early voting, we also see fights by Republicans to prevent ballots that are coming in after the election as well. In fact, I'm seeing right now that the Supreme Court decided that they will not take up the Republicans' rebuttal to the 3-day ballot, the 3-day after the ballot proposal, where they can still accept those ballots. But President Trump on Tuesday, he expressed his desire to find out the results on Election Day. So here's what he had to say about that issue.
Congressmen and women, Republicans that are going to get elected will take back the House, will hold the Senate, will hold the White House. If you look at the polls that came out today and yesterday, and I guess a lot had to do with the debate or a lot had to do with the rallies, I don't know, but you take a look at the polls, look how we're doing in Wisconsin, look how we're doing in Iowa, look how we're doing in Ohio, look how we're doing in Florida, look how we're doing everywhere practically. So I think we're doing very well. We're going to have an exciting night. It would be very, very proper and very nice if a winner were declared on November 3rd instead of counting ballots for 2 weeks, which is totally inappropriate, and I don't believe that that's by our laws.
Now, Boyd, it is also interesting because when you look at, for example, the ballots that have been turning in or people who have voted, Republicans do seem to be closing the gap as we get closer to Election Day. So is it possible that this strategy to limit votes that come in after November 3rd could backfire on Republicans?
you always have to be careful what you wish for. The momentum swings really interesting in these elections. And it's fascinating, too, because you're also going to see it kind of state by state, where many states have not done this kind of massive mail-in voting and absentee voting in the past. And so they're really scrambling. That's going to create some interesting dynamics. I'm from a place where we've been doing it for years, where everyone knows the drill. They know how to make it work. And for the most part, we can get results on election night. I think as a country this time around, I doubt we're going to see that kind of clarity coming out. And as you mentioned, Alex, the momentum seems to be coming in where the Republican cast votes seem to be catching up in terms of number. And so, it's going to be, I think it's going to be tight all the way through. And the question will be, did we wish for the wrong thing when we got to the end?
No, I think it's a very good question to address because, I mean, even as you're saying right now, it does seem like at least the Trump campaign has a little bit of momentum right now. So maybe that's getting people to vote in person, or maybe they were just late to cast their ballots, whatever it may be. But you're exactly right. I don't think we're going to exactly find out until November 3rd, not to mention probable court cases that come after that as well. So we might have to wait a couple days, if not a couple of weeks. But Boyd Matheson, it's a real pleasure having you on this program tonight, breaking down all these headlines. Thank you.
Hey, thanks, Alex.